Okay, so in this lab, we are going to deploy a serverless computing solution so that anytime we upload files to an S3 bucket, then that will trigger an event. And this event, of course, is what's called the output, which goes to a Lambda function, which says to take this event, which is the uploading of the file, and create a CloudWatch event. In other words, create a log, right? So you get a notification or a log file that's maintained every time a file is uploaded to an S3 bucket. So if you look at this example right here, you'll have a end user who uploads files to an S3 bucket, right? That uploading a file is what triggers an event. And we'll create a Lambda rule for that. And then we specify the output type. And the output is to generate a CloudWatch logging message. And so that's basically an example of serverless computing. To do this, no servers required, right? No EC2 instances required. We create a script, we create a function for that script, and we're only charged as that script is executed. But the charge is so nominal in this case, it definitely outweighs the costs of deploying an EC2 instance in the cloud and having files uploaded or downloaded to an EC2 instance. Now, like S3 buckets, which are not part of our VPC, so is AWS Lambda. So you can create an S3 bucket for a website or for a file server and generate a Lambda function for it without even creating a VPC. So again, when we're talking VPCs, we're talking setting up an infrastructure for EC2 instances that can be accessed to, that can go out to the internet or can be accessed from the internet. And then you could have back-end databases in which EC2 instances are the front end and communicating with back-end databases in your VPC. And then, of course, these applications that are on EC2 instances, for example, if they're in a public subnet, they could make use of an internet gateway. And that internet gateway would provide internet access. Now, when you put your databases in a private subnet, you would have to use a NAT gateway for that, right? Because they're in private subnets and they have private IP addresses only. So hopefully you've learned over and over throughout these labs that private IP addresses are not routable into the internet and require the use of a NAT gateway, right? Just like if you plugged in a laptop or a workstation into your home, those laptops or workstations would have private IPs, right? And then you have to have a router provided by your internet service provider, whether it be AT&T or Comcast or some other internet service provider. And on that router, right, on the back end, it's handing out private IP addresses, right, via DHCP, which automatically assigns IP addresses, but those private IP addresses would get converted into a public IP address before they go out to the internet. So it's kind of like the same concept, right? When you have back-end databases in private subnets in the cloud. But with serverless computing, we don't need any of this, right? We can create Lambda functions in S3 buckets without the need for an infrastructure. Okay, and so again, it's one of the benefits of the cloud. Uh, and again, S3 buckets also can be used to host websites in addition to file storage. And one of the labs we'll go over eventually, and we did one in a previous lab, and it kind of showed how you can create file storage retention policies, which data uploaded to a bucket after so many days could be sent to standard and frequent access. And after it's in standard and frequent access for a period of days, it could be sent to Amazon Glacier. So you have layers of storage, right? And so you could do that given this lab here. And I kind of encourage you to experiment with that, right? Kind of take all the labs you've done, and again, you're in a sandbox environment, so you could use a previous lab to create a file storage retention policy using the sandbox environment that we're in. And so again, the goal of this lab is every time an object is loaded into an S3 bucket, we'll use Lambda to create a CloudWatch metric and a CloudWatch event. And we'll kind of see how that works. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an S3 bucket and we'll give it a name. We'll take note of where our bucket is stored, right? Now remember, we don't need a VPC for our bucket, but make note of where the bucket is located. Okay, your Lambda function will need to be stored in the same region. Okay, that's kind of one limitation with Lambda, right? If you're not going to set up a VPC, and these don't require a VPC, then your bucket and your Lambda function have to be in the same region. Okay, then we'll go to Lambda and we'll create a function and we'll give our function a name. We'll use Python 3.9. We'll set up a lab role and we'll go ahead and create the function. Let me put an S in here. And we'll copy and paste the script. Now I provided a script. It's in a Word document. All you'll need to do is cut and paste it into the script window. Okay, and then after we copy the script, we'll deploy the script and we'll add the trigger, right, or the event, and we will go ahead and actually verify that trigger has been created, and then we'll go ahead and upload files and we'll test it. We'll see if that event of uploading a file actually triggers a Lambda function. So let's just go ahead and get started. Okay. So my AWS light is green, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that to open the console. And first step we're going to do is create an S3 bucket. So we'll click on S3, and we'll select Create Bucket, and we'll give it a name. And I'll type Grillo dash. You can type your last name, Grillo dash Lambda dash Lab, and I'll put a number after it, and I'll put a 1. We'll leave the ACLs disabled. We'll block all public access. We'll disable versioning. And we'll go ahead and select Create Bucket. Okay, that creates the bucket. So again, take note of what region it's in. And you can verify that from here. And you can verify that up here in your console. Right? You're in the US East 1 North Virginia region. All right, so once the S3 bucket is created, we'll go ahead and create the Lambda function. We'll type Lambda in the services, we'll search for it, and we'll go ahead and click on Lambda. And we will go back to our instructions, and we'll select Start from Scratch, and we'll give our function a unique name, and we'll select Python 3.9. So again, there's some default functions created, right? You're free to experiment with those. For now, we'll just select Create Function, and we will give it a name. We'll type your last name dash Lambda dash function, put a 1 after it. We'll use Python 3.9, and we'll select the default execution role, and we will select Use an existing role. And the role we'll use is the lab role that's given to us as part of our sandbox environment. And if you click on additional configurations, there's some options there. We're not going to enable a VPC. We're going to go ahead and create a function. Okay, and that creates the function, and it gives you a default Python script, right, which is simply a hello world from Lambda. And we'll go ahead and delete all that. So your cursor is just blinking on line 1. Okay, and then we'll go to our instructions and we'll copy and replace the script, provide it in the lab. And you can explore Lambda and you can try other scripts as well. Okay, and we'll deploy our script and then we'll add a trigger for it. Okay, so we'll go to our Word document and we will do a Control A and just copy all this. In fact, we'll stop copying after the E, and we'll just copy that. And we will right click and select paste, okay? And you should have a blank line on line 24 in which your cursor is blinking, right? On that blank line in 24, okay? And we will go ahead and deploy this script. And it's deploying the code. Okay, the deployment should be successful. And then we'll select add trigger. Okay. And this is where we're going to specify then when you upload objects to an S3 bucket, right? That's the trigger, right? That will trigger the Lambda rule. And so we will go to our instructions. And we will select S3. So we're on step 12 here, right? And the event type we want is all objects that are uploaded, and go ahead and create the event. So we'll select the source. We'll type S3. And we should be able to select our existing bucket. And the event source by default is all objects create events, so we don't have to worry about that. We have to acknowledge the recursive function, okay? Because something we need to know about recursive, it's kind of like a routing loop. You could run into potential if you're using the same bucket for both input, right, upload, or download functions, right? And you had the same rule, you could have a recursive loop going on, right? Because something is uploaded, then it's downloaded, and it's uploaded, and it's downloaded. You could have a continuous loop, kind of like a routing loop that you want to avoid. So we don't have that situation because our rule is simply an upload or an inbound function, right? But if you're going to have an outbound function for download, you'd probably want to create a separate S3 bucket for that. And we will go ahead and click the add button. Okay, and that creates the trigger. Okay. Now some things we want to look at. We want to verify that this event notification is within our S3 bucket and also within our Lambda function. So if we go back to our instructions, okay, we want to go to S3, we want to select the property tab, and we want to go to event notifications. So we're on step 15. We select S3, and we want to select our bucket, and was it the property or permissions tabs? I believe it's the properties. Yeah, it's the properties tab, right? And you want to scroll down to event notification and kind of make sure that's in there, right? And so you have all objects, create events, and the destination type is the Lambda function. And it should match the function that you just created, okay? So that part looks good. And now what we want to do is go to step 16, and we want to go back to Lambda, and we want to select permissions. So we will go back to Lambda, and we're going to want to create our go back to our function that we created. Here it is. We want to click on it. And from here, we want to make sure that if we go to the monitor tab, okay, right now under the monitor tab, nothing's happened yet because we haven't uploaded anything. But that's where we're going to want to go to verify that a CloudWatch event is created. Okay, and then you have other tabs here, configuration, right? But on the left side, you have permissions. If you click on permissions, okay, your role should be lab role, okay, and your resource-based policy statement, you should have a statement ID, okay, that should invoke the Lambda function. Okay, so we want to go to step 18, and we want to upload any PNG file. It doesn't have to be a PNG file. It could be any file. So if you don't have any files, right, you could do a Google search, right? Type in a subject. It could be anything. It could be your favorite rock band. It could be anything, right? So I'll just type summer, PNG, and I'll click on images, and we will select a file. And let's go save image as. It should be a PNG image. We'll just save it to our downloads folder. And we will go ahead and download that. Okay. Now we want to go to our S3 bucket. And we want to upload that image that we just downloaded. Okay, so we will select the bucket name. And we will go to the upload tab. We have no objects in our bucket right now. We will select add files, and we will go to our downloads folder and select the PNG image we just downloaded and click open and select the upload button at the bottom. Okay, and as you see, the upload has been completed. Okay, so we'll click close. Okay, and you have other options in here as well. So if you go to properties, right, this is, you can verify your bucket configuration from the properties tab, permissions. Okay, you want to make sure they'll block all public access is on. Okay, now you can create a bucket policy, right, and you can create one in a JSON document. You can click management, and again, right, I said you could do this yourself, but you can create a life cycle rule, and you could give it a name. You can call it Grillo-life cycle-rule 1. And we want to apply it to all objects in the bucket, and we want to acknowledge that. And for rule actions, we want to select transition current versions of objects between storage classes, right? And here's where you can create your rule, right? So you could say, after how long something's been in an S3 bucket, right, would you move it to standard and frequent access? Now, here's the thing, right? If you're going to enable versioning, you're going to have different versions of the file. And so when you create a lifecycle policy, you could leave your current versions within the bucket, or you could specify that the outdated versions or the non-current versions would be the one that would be transitioned under the lifecycle rule, right? So again, we did a previous lab where we enabled versioning, and you saw how when you upload a file with the same file name, right, then you have a newer file and you have an older file version, right? What do you do with those non-current versions? Those are the ones that could be part of your lifecycle policy. Okay, and again, everything's dependent on your organization and the regulatory compliance requirements. So you could say after 90 days, right, the objects, right, that are the older versions or non-current versions become non-current after 90 days. Okay, and they'll go to standard and frequent access. And then you can add another transition, and you could select Glacier instant retrieval, and you could actually expand it. You could say after 360 days, non-current versions will go from standard and frequent access into Amazon Glacier, which is a more permanent type of storage. Okay, and then you can create a rule for that. Forgot to acknowledge the rule, and then we'll go ahead and create the rule. Okay, so we will go back to our bucket, and we have one object within our bucket. If we click on our bucket, again, mine's a rather long file name, but it's a PNG file. Now we can go back to our Lambda function, and we can verify that the event rule has been created and kind of look at our CloudWatch logs. So if we go to our instructions, it should be the last step. Go back to Lambda, select the monitor tab, right? And we will go ahead and look at our our rule that's been created or event that's been created. So we'll select Lambda and we will select our function and we will select the monitor tab. Okay, and as you could see, one invocation has been read, right? That's the uploading of our PNG file. You have the duration. You see one little dot here that it took in milliseconds, right? 303 milliseconds. And then you have a success rate, right? So the success rate was 100%. And if you scroll down, okay, and it should be under logging here. You click on View CloudWatch Logs. And you'll have your log stream that was created. Okay, and so you can verify that. You can click on it, and you can kind of say, look at the process. Now, what you want to make sure in here is that there's no errors in here. And it tells you the type of file that was uploaded. It won't give you the actual file name, but it will tell you the type of file. So if you uploaded a JPEG image, it would say JPEG, or if you uploaded a Word document, it would say Word document as far as content type. Okay? And so that's how you create a Lambda function to create an event, right? And then that event gets triggered. And anytime something's uploaded to an S3 bucket, you get a CloudWatch log for it. Okay? So that completes this lab, and the last thing we need to do is just simply break down the lab. Okay, and how we break down the lab is as follows. We'll delete the S3 bucket, we'll delete the objects first, then we'll delete the bucket, and then we'll delete the Lambda function. Okay, so we'll go to S3. And you're free to upload additional objects if you want before you do this, and then kind of look at the CloudWatch logs. Okay, we'll click on our bucket name. Under Objects, select the file that we uploaded, and select the delete. And we want to type permanently delete. Now I will just copy that. You know, sometimes it's easier just to type it than to copy it. And we'll select delete objects. Okay, so we have no objects in our bucket. We'll go back to our source, the bucket. We have no objects in our bucket. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is just delete the bucket. So you just click on the circle there, and we will select delete the bucket. And we're going to type the bucket name. Can't have no errors in there, so I got to add a 1 after it. And we're going to select delete bucket. Okay, and the last thing we need to do is simply delete the Lambda function. Okay, select our function, and under actions, we will delete the function. We'll type delete, and click close. Okay, so that completes the lab.